Morning guys. Sunday morning this week, a little bit busy yesterday, didn't have enough time to come down. As I said in my last video, trying to take you through sanding. I think there's a lot of information that you might need to know, make your life easier. Whilst I was getting prepared to show you my array of sanding equipment, I've now realised I'm going to have to put it into two videos, not one. I'm going to split it up into power sanding and hand sanding. When I first started out in the industry, as I said before, mid-70s, believe it or not, this is the very same first sander, DA sander, that I ever bought. It says made in Taiwan on the back. It's a good heavy steel built sander. I think I paid less than £10 for it at the time. At that time that was expensive. I was earning less than £15 a week, so at that time to put that amount of money, a week's wages, into a sander was a bit silly, but it's still going now, so I think I got it right. I'll start off with this one as it's in my hand. Just a conventional DA sander, no bells or whistles on this, apart from it's quite rare these days. Most of the other DA sanders you buy don't have the one facility this has. This has a locking collar. Now what that means, you can rotate this blocking bar against the spindle and it now doesn't work as a dual action, it's single action. So if you're linishing off any spot welds, sharp bits of metal, any places that you've been welding, you can put a rough pad on this, P40, P80, and use it almost like a grinder, but because of the big surface area, it linishes off the weld, creates loads of sparks, so you have to treat it like a grinder in that sort of circumstances. Safety goggles, things like that. But it linishes absolutely beautiful. So that's one thing that you can't get with all the other new style DA sanders. So on this pad, it only mainly gets used for linishing these days. Very hard, it's like a fiberglass pad, very thin fiberglass pad. There's no deflection in the pad, it's solid, so that gives me a good flat surface to linish. So it's basically just a linisher. One thing I will say, this sander's lasted this amount of time, and I can only put it down to, I use regularly proper air tool oil. What I mean regularly, I mean twice a week. If I'm using this, a little dropper that I fill the bottle up with, at least 3 drops into the airline, plug the airline on, squirt it a few times, that's good. Lubricates it enough in time to protect it, keep it going forever. And as I say, that's into nearly 40 years worth of bodywork, and it's still going. So that's the first little DA sander. As I say, these days, it used to be a universal tool. Back in when I started, it was all sort of cellulose and synthetic paints. It was just a universal sander, 5mm orbit, and that was it. It wasn't no bells and whistles. At the same time, I bought 2 other sanders. This one, the Jitterbug, not used very much these days. Its main purpose is you can attach 1/3 of a sheet of wet and dry from your wet and dry. So I would only put, I don't know, anything from 120s, 240s, 320s, whatever, wet and dry on that. But the beauty of this is you can use it wet. So if you had a little spritz gun by the side, or if you needed more water than that for whatever you're doing, you could use that wet. So it obviously gets the sander in a mess, you've got to wash it off after. But that's a nice flat sander, a decent density pad on there, so once again it's just for sanding paint really. That's what it is, all there is to say about that really. It's used wet, it's been around a long time. Square edges, so if you were getting into a place where you needed to get a sharp edge down the side of inside of a bonnet recess or something like that, that'll fit in there nice. It's easier to get in square places than a round sander. The second sander I bought at that time, or I shouldn't really call it a sander, it's a Bodyline Airfoil, twin piston, but single action. That's all it does, backwards and forwards. So that will rip through big heavy amounts of body filler. Because it's flat this direction, you can only use it that direction. So this would only be used for sanding down bottom part of maybe a door skin, big flat areas. And you do have to be careful because there's very few flat panels on a car. The last part, as I say, are the bottoms of the doors, sort of sill areas, rocker panel areas. Yes, you can use that nicely, that will work on a rocker panel or a sill, great. But roofs, they aren't really flat. There's a slight curve in them both ways. Same with the tops of doors, same with fenders, bonnets, hoods, boot lids, whatever. They're not really flat. So this will rip down your filler at the start of your repair, but don't think that this will put it flat. Or I should say, don't think that this will leave a curve in your curved panel. This will put it flat. So if you sand down an area that's got a slight curve and you use that, it will take the curve out and it will look flat. It will look horrible. So you need to go to your long marine board, I would say, sort of a 30-inch, which I'll show you in the next video, where you can actually set a curve on the board to maintain the curve of the panel. Right then, we'll go next to electric DA. These really are just a cost-cutting device, and I say that because if you're using any of the air sanders, they are drinking up anything from 10, 15, 18 CFM of air. So you've now got a great big compressor, 5 horsepower, running probably 70–80% of the duty cycle of the compressor, so it's running all the time. So something like this, which is, I believe it's about 450 watt motor. This is quite a big motor on this one. So to save energy, to save your compressor running all the time, save your electricity bill, if you've got lots of sanding to do, and you're doing a respray of a car all over, whatever, just to save your electric DAs. They do exactly the same. This one is a 5mm orbit on this one. Dust extraction, as with most of the modern sanders, they come with dust extraction. The older ones didn't. So once again, I would mainly use this one for ripping down the damage on your car when you start to do a respray. All your rusted areas, the areas that you want to expose metal to repair dents. This is quite a coarse, quite an aggressive sander. That will rip through as many coats of paint as you want right down to the metal very, very quickly. And that's its basic function really, is to rip down rough paint, to rough out a respray. That's what I'd use that one for. On that one, as I was saying before, different densities of pads, same as the density of my other DA that I use for linishing. This is quite a hard pad. This doesn't deflect. There's no flexibility in this pad. This just rips down the paint. Once you rip down the paint to bare metal, then you need to feather edge that repaired contour line, the repair area. You need to feather that down with a better sander than this. This one, this is when I said in my last video I bought a few more sanders. These are the two that I've actually bought. These are just universal, or actually made by Universal Tools, but it's just a universal DA. This one is if you're only going to rough out 1 or 2 panels and you don't worry about using the compressor, you don't have to save electricity. That's what this one's for. This again is just a roughing out sander. You've got an extra side handle on it because you're going to be pushing quite hard sometimes to actually rip through multiple heavy coats of paint. This one, because we will be trying to feather edge the paint when we're using these, the density of this pad is quite soft, it's quite flexible. You can see the movement there. And what actually happens when you're sanding, you've got bare metal in the middle where you've roughed out and you've gone down to bare metal. You now need to feather the paint around that edge. You need to get the sander to lift up on that painted edge to start feathering out, so you can make a nice big milky edge around your repair. Medium density DA pad is designed to flex on the outside of the pad where it's made weakest. So that will flex, jump up on top of the paint that you've roughed out and start the process of feather edging that back. So that's why we would use a medium density pad, it's quite soft, to assist feather edging the paint out. So that's obviously, it's got holes in and dust extraction that you can control to suck your dust away. Connect it to your vacuum extract unit. That will take your dust, so once again there's no dust on the surface. You can see how your feather edging is going at the time rather than needing to blow it all off, wipe it to see how you're going. So the dust extraction is a big key factor for a lot of these sanders. This one is exactly the same as that one. So this is, we'll say up to priming stage sanding. Yeah. So up to priming stage would be no finer than a 320 grit paper. So your sanding discs would be no smoother than a 320. Exactly the same, only this is a hand one rather than the T-handle sitting out the side. It's exactly the same. Medium density pad, as you can see, that deflects rather nicely. It's quite a soft pad, so that's for creating a feathered edge up to 320 on your discs. The process that I use, you don't really need many grades of paper when you're sanding. There's all sorts, dozens of different grades of papers out there. I try and stay away from 80 grit unless it's working in sheet metal, linishing, that type of thing. It's a very coarse, very aggressive scratch. I find they're the scratches that give you problems in your finishing. If you've got any scratches left over that you've missed, that hasn't shown up in a guide coat, bet your dollar it's started from your 80 grit. So apart from, you apply your filler, you've obviously got spreader marks in your filler. If you want to rough out those spreader marks, by all means 80 grit, whiz it over quickly. As soon as you've got rid of the filler spreader overlaps in your filler, choose something finer. I always use a 120 or a 180 from there on. 120, 180 is good these days because our fillers come along a long way. Most of the fillers are easy sand, where when the 80 discs came out, the filler that we used to use, like the David's Isopon and stuff, was rock hard filler. So you needed a really aggressive disc to rub it down. The fillers aren't like that now. They're lightweight, easy sand. So 120, 180 to rough your filler out is as good as you need to go, really. So that takes care of your 120, 180 filler. Next one up would be 320. With a 320 disc, it puts enough of a tooth on that primer will stick to it. Great, primer will stick to P320, fantastic. But the primer will also fill the 320 scratch. So now we don't have any scratches in our repair. So that's it. 180 is good, then to 320. Now we're into finishing our primer. Finishing primer, I go to a P500 disc. There's one still on the pad. P500. dry sanding, P500 will knock down filler, won't leave any marks in. You can cover solvent-based base coats and paints with a P500 with no marks showing at all. If you're going to finish with water-based, water-based doesn't have the same film build as solvent-based, even though the colour covers better. So to finish primer to be coated with water-based, go to P600. So that brings us up to 3 grades of paper. 180 is fine, 320 for primer. Now we're just doing 500 or 600. You can just keep 1 grade of paper. You can just keep a 600. That's fine for sanding, for solvent bases as well. So you don't need to keep a 5 and a 600. I do, but you don't need to. A 600 will do them both if you only want to stock 1 grade of paper. So that now is taking us up to this sander. It's a snap-on blue point sander. This is, because I'm sanding down primer, this is a fine orbit sander with a medium density pad again, but not a thick medium density pad. As you can see, that pad it's a good 1/2 inch, 12-14 millimeters thick. This pad is thinner. I call this a 3/8 pad on this one. It's actually thinner. I don't need the flexibility in the pad to create feathering, because we've already feathered the car. The car's been feathered, the car's now been primed, so we've now got a flat surface to work to. There's no feathering that we need to do. So this will sand the primer ready for paint. So this is again dust extracted unit, medium density pad, but a thin medium density pad, so it's less flexible than the other one. Even though they're both medium density, it's thinner, so it doesn't move as much. 500 or 600 pads. I'll talk a little bit about